what the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. But before you think you've heard that 1,000 times, pause for a second. What if the only reason you still feel mentally weak is because you believe you are weak? And what if everything you've labeled failure and bad luck, lack of confidence and anxiety, fear of losing money, is nothing more than a collection of stories you've repeated so often they've become your identity? It sounds absurd, I know. And that's exactly why it works. Every real change begins when something within you revolts and says, I refuse to keep being the same person. Focus is the first frontier of mental strength, and it's precisely where most people lose the battle without realizing it. Have you ever noticed how your mind seems to be constantly trying to pull you away from what truly matters? It's no coincidence. Studies show that nearly half the time, the human mind is wandering, thinking about things completely unrelated to the present moment. And when you live like this, without realizing it, you start to believe you are weak, indecisive, lazy, when in reality you're just fighting a silent enemy, dispersion. And think with me, how many times have you started a plan full of energy only to abandon it before even seeing results? How many times did you decide to save money, and then with just a bit of stress you impulsively spent it? How many times did you promise yourself you'd do something every day and gave up at the first sign of fatigue? Do you notice how this repeats almost like a universal pattern? It's as if there's a robot inside your mind, trained to keep you from what would help you grow. But here's the point. It's not because you're incapable. It's because you've never trained your attention. The entire world is vying for your concentration. Notifications, advertisements, pressures, comparisons, fears. And as this happens, your mental strength is slowly but surely drained. And this is where one of the most powerful stories from Napoleon Hill's life comes in, a moment that perfectly defines what it means to regain focus. When he received Andrew Carnegie's invitation to investigate the secret to success, Hill was a nobody. He had no money, no reputation, no stability. He was just a young journalist, living a simple life with responsibilities, bills to pay, and an uncertain future. Carnegie looked at him and said something that would change everything. He wanted Hill to dedicate 20 years of his life to studying the human mind and revealing to the world how people truly achieve extraordinary results. Imagine yourself standing before one of the wealthiest men in history, hearing that you should spend 2 entire decades researching something no one even knew was real. Anyone would have backed down. Anyone would have thought, this is too big for me. But Hill didn't retreat. He did exactly what mentally strong people do. He chose to focus on one mission, just one. And that's what shaped all of modern success psychology. And perhaps you didn't notice, but this story carries a powerful detail. Hill had no guarantees whatsoever. No contract, no promise of return, nothing. He accepted because focusing on something greater than himself simply made sense. And that's exactly what's missing for most people today. Direction, clarity, purpose. Because when you lack clarity, any distraction seems important. When you lack purpose, any emotion sways you. When you lack focus, any challenge brings you down. And it's at this point that mental weakness is born. Not from failure, but from a lack of direction. Now imagine if you chose just one thing to focus on for the next 3 days. Just one. It could be saving a small amount of money. It could be exercising for 10 minutes. It could be studying a single chapter. It could be organizing a closet. 3 days. No negotiating. No changing your objective halfway through. You would realize something Hill understood even as a young man. The mind responds to commands it receives repeatedly. The more you train your focus, the more you feel strength, clarity, and mastery. And when you feel mastery, the entire world seems simpler. What you once thought was laziness transforms into energy. What seemed like anxiety turns into direction. What appeared to be chaos becomes internal order. Because mental weakness doesn't disappear when you try to be strong. It disappears when you decide to stop wasting energy on everything all at once. And perhaps you now realize why people like Thomas Edison achieved such extraordinary feats. They weren't exceptionally gifted. They were focused. Edison would enter his laboratory and work for hours without noticing time pass because his mind was entirely absorbed in the task, completely. And that's rare today. extremely rare, but it is trainable. And when you train, something curious happens. What once seemed impossible begins to feel natural. The internal voices that whispered, "You can't do it," start to quiet down. The fear of failure loses its grip. Distractions diminish. You begin to experience a feeling you might not have felt in a long time, the sensation of being in control of yourself. This is the first step to stop being mentally weak, reclaiming what the world tried to steal from you, your focus. Because a focused mind is a powerful mind, and a powerful mind doesn't negotiate its goals with minor distractions. It creates direction, it creates discipline, and it creates results even when everything around seems to be trying to bring it down. Identity is the invisible foundation of all mental strength. It's what decides what you tolerate, what you pursue, what you accept, what you abandon, and even what you believe you deserve. And that's precisely why so many people feel mentally fragile, because they are carrying identities they never chose. Identities that were thrust upon them by circumstances, criticisms, comparisons, traumas, repeated failures, or family and environmental expectations. And here's the question that awakens something profound. How many times have you made bad decisions not because they were the right ones, but because they were the only decisions that fit the person you believed yourself to be? Think about how many times you've stopped yourself from trying something for fear of looking ridiculous. How many times have you turned down an opportunity because it wasn't for people like you? How many times have you wanted to earn more, grow more, go further, but your own behavior pulled you back into the same pattern, as if an invisible elastic band was holding your actions captive? That's not bad luck, that's identity. And identity isn't what you think about yourself, it's what you repeat about yourself. Science proves this. Research in behavioral psychology shows that when someone creates daily microactions that reinforce a new identity, the brain begins to reinterpret that person as more capable, more disciplined, more secure. It's not motivation, it's neuroplasticity. It's not life change, it's mental reprogramming. And it's precisely here that so many people get lost, because they try to change their behavior without changing the identity that silently defines that behavior. And if you notice, all the great names who transcended gigantic difficulties did one thing in common. They adopted an identity before having any real proof of it. This is the case with Arnold Schwarzenegger, whose mindset became almost a scientific study of discipline. He didn't start acting like a world champion after winning his first title. He began acting like a champion years before, when no one believed in him, when his accent was a laughingstock, when his circumstances were limited. He adopted the identity before the victory. And victory came because his identity guided his every daily decision. But nothing compares to the emotional impact of Napoleon Hill's real story. Because before he was an author, before he was a reference in personal development, before he interviewed legendary figures, Hill was a rebellious, insecure, aimless boy living in extreme poverty in the mountains of Virginia. The surrounding environment told him his destiny was the coal mine, like everyone else. His identity was shaped by the scenery, by the lack of resources, by family limitations. Until something extraordinary happened. His stepmother entered the family. She saw in Hill what no one else had. She didn't see the boy who caused trouble. She saw potential. And it was she who gave him his first set of books, his first writing instrument, his first encouragement to think big. It was she who said, and this is historic, that he was not born to dig coal, but to dig ideas. For the first time, someone planted a different identity in that boy. And that single seed changed everything. Hill began to believe he could be something beyond what the world told him, and that belief propelled him to follow the path that would transform him into the father of success psychology. This story reveals something profound. An identity shift doesn't begin when you feel ready. It begins when you decide the old label no longer fits. When you look at yourself and say, I refuse to keep living as a diminished version of myself. And perhaps this explains why so many of us remain trapped in the fear of earning more money, the fear of making important decisions, the fear of stepping off the predictable path. Because deep down we're trying to protect the old identity, the one built on fears, limitations, and painful experiences. But everything changes when you question, what if I'm not that person? What if I've always been more than what I was told? The identity you embrace determines the strength you feel. And when you start to repeat, even timidly, a new internal narrative, I am disciplined, I am capable, I am someone who deserves more, something begins to adjust. Small actions gain momentum, small challenges seem smaller. What once held you back now propels you forward. Because nothing is more powerful than a mind that believes in a new version of itself. And perhaps this is where the key to overcoming mental weakness lies. Stop defending the identity that keeps you small. Weakness vanishes when you embrace the possibility of being greater than the circumstances that shaped you. When you grasp this, even your fears begin to work in your favor. Because a strong identity doesn't make you invincible, but it does make you unshakable. Mastering your emotions is the step that separates those who merely dream from those who truly transform their lives. Because goals, focus, planning, or even discipline are useless if, at the decisive moment, your emotions pull you back. And this is where many people are mistaken. Most believe they are weak because they lack sufficient willpower, when in reality, they simply haven't learned to deal with their own internal impulses. And these impulses govern far more than you imagine. Think about how many opportunities you let slip away simply because you felt fear before acting. Think about how many important conversations you avoided because your heart raced, your voice trembled, or your mind began to create negative scenarios. How many times were you on the verge of asking for a raise, presenting an idea, or speaking with someone important, and something inside you paralyzed you? This emotional block is so common that, according to studies from the University of California, more than 40% of bad financial decisions occur due to impulsive reactions such as anxiety, anger, euphoria, fear of losing out, or fear of taking a risk. In other words, many people think they have a money problem, but in reality, they have an emotion problem. That's why some people, even when earning more, remain poor. That's why some relationships needlessly explode. That's why extremely talented individuals sabotage their own careers. And this rule applies to absolutely every aspect of life. And there's a very powerful, extremely well-known example that perfectly illustrates this idea: Mike Tyson. A man with absurd talent, extraordinary physical strength, speed, technique, applauded worldwide. But emotionally? Impulsive, uncontrolled, trapped by explosive reactions that destroyed what he took years to build. Tyson lost fortunes, lost opportunities, lost respect, and lost direction because he couldn't control what was happening within him. And this teaches us something about mental strength. No matter how strong you appear on the outside, your true strength depends on how much you master what's inside. And this is precisely what makes Napoleon Hill's true story so impactful at this point. Because, contrary to what many imagine, Hill didn't just live a life of research, interviews, and success. He faced real threats. During his investigations and exposures of unethical practices of the time, Hill was persecuted, intimidated, and even had to flee with his family. Imagine this scene, night after night, living in fear, constant tension, uncertainty, not knowing if he was safe, not knowing if he would be found, hearing footsteps, noises, voices, imagining dangers in every shadow. Anyone could have given up, could have deleted everything he wrote, could have silenced himself and simply disappeared. But Hill did the opposite. He took a deep breath and maintained emotional control. And this doesn't mean he didn't feel fear. It means he didn't let fear decide for him. He wrote, continued researching, continued teaching, continued helping people. He chose not to react with panic, but to respond with purpose. And that's exactly what makes someone mentally strong, the ability to separate emotion from action. And when you understand this, something changes within you. Life stops being an emotional battlefield where you constantly put out internal fires and transforms into something completely different, a space where you choose how to react. Because emotions aren't enemies, they're just too fast. They appear before your thoughts, before your logic, before your reason. But when you learn to pause, breathe, and observe instead of reacting, everything changes. You begin to realize that not every fear is true, not every anxiety indicates danger, not every anger deserves a response, and not every impulse should turn into action. And when you establish this distance between feeling and acting, a type of strength is born. Discreet, silent, almost invisible, yet extremely powerful. The kind of strength that enables you to make smarter decisions, converse with more clarity, negotiate with more confidence, love with greater maturity, and work with more strategy. It's a force that begins small, like a thread of consciousness, but expands to completely transform the way you live. That's why people who master their emotions achieve things that seem like miracles to those who live in internal chaos. They don't wait for motivation to arrive. They don't succumb to panic. They don't follow bad impulses. They simply breathe, observe, and choose. And that's where the secret lies. Emotion is a visitor, not a command. It appears, but it doesn't decide. It screams, but it has no authority. You are the one who decides. And when you finally understand this, you begin to realize that you weren't weak. You just didn't know you could be in command. Because mental strength isn't about eliminating fear, anxiety, or insecurity. It's about doing what needs to be done even when they are present. True strength emerges precisely at the moment you stop being a hostage to your own emotions and become the author of your own story. Mental strength also depends on your ability to transform pain into fuel. And this is perhaps one of the most neglected skills by people who consider themselves emotionally weak. Because the truth is simple, everyone feels pain. Everyone faces rejection, failure, shame, regrets, losses. The difference lies in what each person does with it. While some sink, others grow. While some interpret pain as a sign of incapacity, others interpret it as a sign of direction. And here's a question that might surprise you. How many times have you given up on something important because you believed the pain was proof that it wasn't for you? Most people do this. It's statistical. Research from the American Psychological Association shows that about 65% of people abandon personal projects or important goals after the first major emotional obstacle, believing that initial difficulty is evidence that it's not the right path. But this is an interpretation, not a truth. Pain is merely a sign, and a sign doesn't determine destiny. And there's an extremely powerful example of someone who transformed pain into strength, and that person is Henry Ford. Before creating the Ford Motor Company, he went bankrupt 2 times, was ridiculed by investors, and considered crazy for believing he could put the common man in an automobile. The pain of repeated failures would have destroyed anyone. But Ford did exactly the opposite. He transformed every failure into a new attempt, and each attempt brought him closer to the solution. Hill studied Ford closely and said his greatest talent wasn't innovation, it was the ability to convert frustration into persistence. But no example compares to the true story of Napoleon Hill that deeply connects with this theme, a case few people know, but one that reveals how much he needed to transform pain into strength to continue. After years of working on his great life project, the original manuscript of The Law of Success, which contained interviews, research, notes, and discoveries accumulated over nearly 2 decades, was destroyed in a fire. Imagine that. The work he dedicated 20 years to build simply turned to ashes in minutes. All the records, all the details, an entire chapter of his life reduced to smoke. Most people would have collapsed, would have said it was a sign to give up, would have accepted the pain as a sentence. But Hill did something completely different, something so powerful it defines his philosophy to this day. He took a deep breath, looked at the destruction and thought, if I did it one time, I can do it better now. And then he rewrote everything from scratch, not with despair but with purpose, not with resentment but with clarity. And it was precisely this rewritten version that became one of the most influential works in the history of personal development. Now, think with me. How many times have you experienced an emotional fire? Something that erased what you were building? A dream, a relationship, a plan, an opportunity, and you thought that was the end? What if that was just the beginning? What if that pain was merely pushing you toward an even more mature and stronger version of yourself? And perhaps you realize now, it's not the pain that weakens you, it's your interpretation of it. A rejection can destroy you or redirect you. A failure can shame you or educate you. A loss can paralyze you or liberate you. Pain has no meaning until you give it one. And when you decide that pain is fuel, it stops being an enemy and becomes a leverage point. You stop thinking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start thinking, "What is this trying to show me?" And this internal shift changes absolutely everything. And to feel this in practice, there's a simple, direct, and transformative exercise. Over the next 3 days, every time something uncomfortable happens, a criticism, a frustration, a difficulty, an unforeseen event, you won't react immediately. You will pause, breathe, and ask, "How can this strengthen me?" Your mind will resist, of course, but that is precisely where strength begins to be born. Because the difference between being mentally weak and mentally strong isn't about eliminating pain, but about learning to use it. And once you master this, nothing else can bring you down, because even your worst moments start working in your favor. What once tore you down now builds you up. What once held you back now propels you forward. Mental strength is born right here, the moment you decide to stop running from pain and start transforming it into power. Mental strength isn't born from some special talent, but from your ability to take control of your focus, identity, emotions, and even the pain life throws your way. When you understand that every challenge can be transformed into direction, every fear into clarity, and every stumble into growth, something within you changes forever. Fragility ceases to be a destiny and becomes merely a starting point. And if this content resonated with you, then the next video appearing on your screen right now will take you even further. It is literally the next step in your evolution of wisdom and brings you closer to that silent commitment to become 1% better than you are right now. Thank you very much for being here, for investing in yourself, and for walking with me on this journey. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.